I am.
Okay, we'll call budget meeting number 5 to order. Spencer, would you mind taking roll for us?
I will. Supervisor Lewis.
Present.
Supervisor Day.
Here.
Supervisor McDaniel.
Yes.
Supervisor Ayers.
Here.
And Supervisor Lyons is away at the Final Four.
Good deal. Good deal. We'll jump right into the review of the FY 2023 budget. And consideration to schedule a public hearing on budget has been moved to the April 11th regular meeting. So, Mr. Suter, would you like to do a quick review?
Sure, I'll keep this as brief as possible. This is our fifth budget meeting for the full board. To recap, we've seen some significant challenges through this process, a lot of effort. We are now getting to the point where we're more confident in our numbers. I'll briefly list the challenges and then review how they've been addressed and conclude with where we are now and potential decisions the board may want to make this evening or over the course of the next week. The first challenge we faced is, of course, we found ourselves without a finance director early in the budget process. And this caused a great deal of stress for some of us, but we need to keep the process moving ahead while we worked out the budget. Second thing that we dealt with was the fact that we had obviously more requested expenditures than projected revenues, and this is fairly standard for us. The initial gap was around $2 million, and this concluded an estimated cost to bring our staff to within 90% of the market salary average and provide a cost of living increase to keep up with the market. Following that, the General Assembly ended their session without a budget, which is always difficult. It's happened to us a few times in the past in my tenure here. We always, a big discussion point or big decision point in every budget is how much revenue are we going to get from the Commonwealth. And finally, we were faced with the challenge of increasing vehicle valuations and the impact on the personal property tax assessments. So I'll do a quick review of the work to address these challenges. First, we need some help, and ultimately we retain the services of John Montoro with VML Vaco, who helped shepherd the process. And we now have Ashton Harrison on board with us. This is just Ashton's second day with us, so can't expect him to get his arms completely around this yet, but he has certainly hit the ground running with some good ideas. Second, over the course of the past 6 weeks, Finance Committee has worked to close the budget gap. We're now within reasonable reach of a balanced budget, and we'll show those figures in a little bit. With regard to the budget schedule and the failure of the General Assembly to give us a budget at the state level, at the board's last regular meeting, you approved a Finance Committee recommendation to delay the previously adopted budget schedule by a week. By the old schedule, as Chairman McDaniel noted, the board would have been considering a budget to advertise tonight, April 4th. Later in the agenda, we'll be asking the board to consider adoption of a revised schedule. And assisting with addressing this challenge, the General Assembly is back in session today. Finally, a tremendous amount of work from the Commissioner of Revenue's office and the Finance Committee and staff, particularly the Commissioner of Revenue's office and John Montoro, and also with a law just signed into effect at the state level, we can now predict the impact of increased vehicle valuations. The new state law allows the setting of different rates for, as a group, vehicles, campers, and motorcycles, and separately for all other personal property. So you could set a different rate for those two different groups, two different categories. This evening, we'll show you where we are currently and ask for your consideration on any additional options you might want to consider. And as noted, our plan is to present a balanced budget to you at your meeting next Monday evening with a request to advertise budget public hearing on April 26th and a budget adoption date of May 3rd. The Finance Committee is not yet to the point to make a recommendation and do not wish to do so before getting the full board's feedback. The idea would be to discuss options relative to both revenues and expenditures. We're confident in our current non-discretionary revenue numbers. However, we're still wrestling a little bit with the personal property tax rate. Essentially, increased valuations at the current 450 rate would have resulted in very significant increase to revenues if no change was made to the tax rate. And again, the legislature did pass that law, which would allow us to split those categories. We've run scenarios and varying tax rates for the vehicle category, each of which results in a net which is either positive or negative. Similarly, the Finance Committee has discussed some discretionary expenditure requests that are still in the budget. And starting there are several assumptions that the Finance Committee has made with regard to revenues. The assumption is that the localities will be held harmless on the grocery tax. That's all the information that we're getting from Richmond, is the localities will be held harmless. We have budgeted conservatively in the sales and meals tax. You'll see a little bit of that in a minute. And we've assumed a 5% increase in comp board salary funding and budgeted the local cost. That's the numbers we're still getting out of Richmond, is they're still sticking around the 5%. Under the expenditure side, it assumes that with regard to compensation, our goal is to get to everyone as much as is possible to 90% of the market and give a 5% COLA to keep up with our competition. The school's request is still in the budget at the original $244,000 level, or above $244,000 above the current year level. I want to remind everyone at the last joint meeting, the schools did ask for a total additional amount of $567,375 or $79 above level. There are requests for supplements in the General District and Juvenile Domestic Relations Court. Those are for $3,000 per full-time employee and $1,500 for part-time staff. And these are supplements that are seen. It's in your budget books. There's a comparison in some other localities that do that. That total request is for 8 full-time and 1 part-time position, for a total request of $25,500. And finally, most 501c3s have asked for an increase over the current year. Most of those increases are in the 10% range, which is back to the 2019 levels. The total increase there is approximately $20,000. And given that, are there any comments that gentlemen from the Finance Committee would like to add to my overview?
I'll start if that's okay with Mr. Lewis.
It is.
The grocery tax, I believe the Senate version had the money coming back to the locality. The House budget version had it coming to the schools. And again, as Mr. Suter said, we've had discussions with some people in Richmond, and feel like that it's probably going to go the way of heading back to the locality. But even if it were to go to the schools, we've had that conversation, but we would just discount our funding to the schools in that amount in order to, for they wouldn't necessarily see the gain, we wouldn't see the decrease. So we would be made whole there. We have budgeted some increase for the sales and meals tax, but it has been conservative. There was a big jump last year. The hope is that it will continue, but we just don't have a trend yet to know if that is going to continue. The expenditures or items that we need to discuss tonight, just to get everybody's feel for it, what you want to do with those. There one item under the school's request that has been tossed around that I'll just throw out there. I believe they had asked for a 1% bonus for their employees. That is something that possibly, if the board so chose to do, we could look at, instead of budgeting for that, allow them in their end of year savings, rather than this one time, rather than contributing to the capital escrow account, to allow them to use that at the end of the year for a bonus. it's not a long-term solution, but it would be a one-time deal. And again, I will echo what Mr. Suter said. John Montoro has been great to work with, and he hasn't said that he's going to talk bad about us to anybody yet, but he's been really good. And the Commissioner of Revenue has, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've asked him to, and his office, to schedule, provide us with information multiple times throughout our meetings and in the days after that. And they've been quick to turn around that information and provide us with some accurate information. So really appreciate their willingness and help there. We did get the NADA book value for our current fleet. Now realize that will change, between now and August, because our fleet of vehicles will change. People will trade, sell, buy, whatever. And we would have had to got that information in August. I think it was really beneficial for us to get it now. As you may remember, back in January, we were hearing from different localities up and down the valley that they were anticipating their book to increase in value, which shouldn't happen, but to increase in value 40, 50, maybe even 60%. Here recently, as much as 2 weeks ago, the theory was 20 to 30% was what a lot of people were anticipating the increase to be. In the Finance Committee, I mean, we had almost tried to settle on, we were having discussions back and forth between 20 or 25 and what would be most prudent for our area. We decided to go ahead and order the book value, and thank goodness we did, because on average, our fleet, it looks like it's going to increase in value around 13%. If we just budgeted 25, we would have been severely under budget. So really thankful that we got that done. And that doesn't mean that everybody's vehicle is increasing in value by 13%. Some may increase by 50%. Some may decrease by 20%. It's just, when you look at our entire fleet of vehicles, that was what the average was. Mr. Lewis, anything I forgot there? Or?
No, nothing you forgot. Just some, things I differ on a little bit. But I think the general theme that you mentioned, which I definitely agree with, is, as usual, we still sit here with so many unknowns. It's just a maddening process to me, but we have to estimate as best we can. My concern from a conservative aspect of the grocery tax being made whole is how that process is going to work, and that still hasn't been 100% defined, to my understanding. And if we're talking general fund dollars, which I think from the state, which I think is what's happened, how often has that changed in year 2 or 3? How much a percent you get? Maybe in 2 years it's, oh well, we can only do 75%. So I've seen that happen way too many times. And I think part of our job is to estimate conservatively, just as Mr. McDaniel was saying with the vehicles. We worked really hard to try to figure that out and make sure we don't overestimate something there. So
can I ask a question on the vehicles? Or
sure.
So the estimate now is on average 13%, but do you expect that that's going to fluctuate and could possibly be 10%? I mean, or do you feel that 13% by the end of the year is going to be where we're at?
It will fluctuate some, just because there will be some vehicles that come off and some vehicles that come on. The fleet itself will change slightly.
But that's not necessarily indicative of the percent of increase. There's two factors there, right? As ins and outs come in, new cars, different things, then you also tack on the back to the change in the percentage of what the valuation might be. So it's a double-edged sword. And I don't mean to cut you off, David.
No, go right ahead.
There's
Right.
like two levels of
So,
what you're trying to estimate there.
right, but to your point of being conservative, should we be thinking to reduce it by that 13, or should we be thinking to reduce it by 10%, not knowing that it might go down?
And that's yes, ma'am. That was sort of in my comments here. Yeah, that was what I was thinking. So yes, I agree with that for the one reason of the grocery tax. That's the main example at this point. In general, we know we want to estimate low. Now we can debate whether the 13% is already, sort of a conservative number, but I agree with that sentiment. And then, another concern of mine is as we look at these scenarios, as Mr. Suter said, we do have not the current school's request in, we have something, and the reason we've left it is because we firmly believe that the number that we have in there is probably where it's going to end up, but it's yet another unknown. But as David, or as the scenario show, that is a discretionary number, what the board feels is adequate to the schools. But to continuing on that vein, which is, part of my thing, we're talking about 5% for county, the schools are asking for 5% and the 1%. The goal of this board, of the Board of Supervisors in previous years, was to make attempts to keep the school employees in, not at the top of our region comparables necessarily, but certainly at least in the middle. And so with a 5, we're still going -5 to as other jurisdictions are doing 10, 12, 16%. And that's based on just this year. The past few years have shown, cost of living increases, inflation, all these things that really hit everybody, which I think is why the state and it did the 5%. And this board has certainly supported public safety with both the EMTs, emergency personnel, and the sheriff's department. And we should. And then we said that was a start there. Well, I can't, that concept doesn't just turn off to me for other necessary employees who are in the same battle with, recruiting from, other counties, or having our people go elsewhere, which is a common thing. So, I'm not sure where that number is going to end up. So I'm speaking ahead a little bit in some of my thoughts towards when we start looking at the scenarios, but those are just some feelings from this member of the finance.
So the finance committee hasn't settled on a number for supporting the schools in terms of their wages yet.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. It's we'd hoped to have a better health insurance estimate, or they had, I should say, to provide to us. So that's the biggest swing in there, I think, so no, we haven't quite yet. That's one of the, the discretionary expenses, we wanted to get everybody's thought on, because we're struggling with what exactly the best scenario is as well. So it's good to get the other input, but no, we have not.
And that's that's a good thing as well. There are certain concepts or thoughts that each of us has our own thought or concept of, and that's why we wanted to get everybody's input on these particular things. I mean, you know, there's not everything that Mr. Lewis and I agree on. There's not everything Mr. Day and I agree on. Not everything me and Ms. Aaron, you know, but that's the beauty of having 5 elected officials. We can discuss it, we can come up with an outcome, and we can all move forward in whatever direction is decided upon. So
I think one thing we all do agree on from previous meetings and previous discussions is we are trying to find the way to get relief to our citizens as well. And that's, you know, why we're looking at some pretty close scenarios to me of how we can try to get the most help. So I know we all want to do that because we've had those conversations.
Your question about the 13%, I would welcome our commissioners here with us, Mr. Weitzel's thoughts on the 13% increase. Anything you can add to that?
I mean, versus budgeting for 10 or 15 or what you would recommend.
We're not living in normal times, but excuse me, I've never known our value to decrease in our fleet. So what we valued as of last week has changed even today because new vehicles have come on and some have gone out. But in the end, that value that we give the finance committee last week should increase. It always has by the time we're done billing for 2022, whether it be the book, and I highly suspect it will be, that book value we create in August is certainly going to be more than the value we give them last week, because no matter what happens to the economy between now and August when we bill, the value of those vehicles is based on January 1st. So if you got a vehicle January 1, it was assessed at $40,000 and the market crashes between now and August, it's still going to be taxed at $40,000.
Okay.
So that trend
Okay.
in my 19 years has always increased. I've never seen the value of your fleet go down from one year to the next. So I don't expect it to be lower than 13. I don't know that it'll be a lot higher than that, but certainly not lower.
Okay.
Because the only change would necessarily be from the date that you got that report to the date that you prepared the bills, what cars are added or
Yes.
taken out.
I mean, it's just like today, we could not run you new numbers today because our fleet's already changed. And we allowed it to change as of Friday afternoon because we thought we were done running numbers. So we couldn't do anything new today based on that. So it's changed that much in a week and a half, 10 days. So it's certainly going to change between now and August, and then it'll even continue to change after that because we'll end up supplementing items after that original book is created.
Mhm.
Stuff that comes in between then and the end of the year. And it's, I mean, it's not unusual for us to bill for 2022, even into late 2023, because for whatever reason, we're just finding out about a vehicle that come into the county that nobody reported to us, or it wasn't titled to DMV, but ownership was there in time for us to bill in the calendar year.
You're going to find out about my electric car in 2020.
Sure, sooner or later.
Thank you. So the 13% seems like a baseline good number.
Okay. Thank you.
So where we are right now, and thank you for the discussion, that discussion really does help us as staff and certainly I guess finance committee as well. But Mr. Montoro is with us now, and I've asked him to share his screen at the time, and I think that's the appointed time. And he's going to go over revenues, expenditures at a high level, and let you know kind of what's changed since the last time we had an overview. And then he's got some scenarios on the personal property tax rate.
Thank you, Spencer. I did unmute my mic, did I not? Okay,
Did?
good. Excellent. All right. Well, I thought we'd just show you where we are now with revenues and expenses in summary, and then I'll go to the summary sheet, which shows kind of where we are. Since the last time, we basically, under the local taxes, we went ahead and made the determination that we were not going to be harmed by any change in the grocery tax. So we increased that revenue, I guess, about 400,000. We tweaked the meals tax a little bit. The difficulty in predicting right now is we really don't have any length of time to go by. A lot of the taxes that are based on economic activity look great for the last 6 months, but we don't know if that's a rebound that's going to come back down and level off, or it's going to continue at that rate. So got a little bit more conservative with like the meals tax. We also got a little bit more conservative on fines and forfeitures. We gave the sheriff a lot to do as far as catching speeders on the highway. We dialed that back just a little bit. Still has a busy year ahead of him, but just dialed that down a little bit. And that's really pretty much the only change. You can see local revenues have increased. Our budget last year was 42.2 million. Now it's 45.5. So still a pretty significant increase. And that's without the personal property taxes. We kept it at our original budget for here. And that number was very low and very conservative to begin with. So that leaves us with a total budget of $52.2 million in revenue. And we switch over to expenses. If I can do it without. There were just some very minor changes to expenses. We got some additional information for a couple of departments, but nothing significant. That's at 52.6. And this is before. Yes,
Can I
sir.
jump in there real quick? Just something I wanted to point out, that a lot of the increase you're seeing is in public safety and core services.
Yeah.
And the increase you see in community development, a lot of that is lodging tax. That's again, it's passed through from the percentage of the lodging tax. 3% goes to the Virginia Horse Center and approximately 2% to tourism. So that's pretty big numbers with the lodging proceeds that we've seen tick up.
And if any of you want to see.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, and it's particularly in that case, that everyone realizes that that's not a big expenditures that are going out the door as far as new expenditures for the county. That's a revenue associated increase. Sorry, John.
Sorry about that. I am at one of your fellow counties' administration buildings tonight, using their office to do my presentations. So I wanted to make sure I didn't have to get back in the building without a key. Okay. So our expenses then are at 52.6 million. And I don't think there was anything else that we changed here. So let's go to the summary sheet. So basically here is now where we are, 52. Here's the revenues, expenses. So expenditures exceed revenues by 369. And then if you deduct the changes for the market study adjustments and the COLA at 5%, it's an addition of 452,000. That leaves us with $821,000 to make up. All right, so what I'm going to show you now are, with regard to personal property, we ended up taking, our current rate is at 450, but obviously at 450, as Spencer mentioned, we would increase revenues by close to, not quite $2 million, 1.6, 1.7 million. So we reduced the rate to 3.875 first to see how much additional revenue that would generate. Well, that generates about $900,000. And as you can see, as a result, the deficit disappears, and we have with a slight surplus. I don't want to use the term surplus, but revenues exceed expenditures by 83,000. As David mentioned, some of the current budget options that we're still considering are down here, in which he went over before. But this is where we stand if the rate now is set at $8.75. If we reduce that a little bit and set the rate at 3.8, $3.80, that gives us an additional 788,000. So now you've got a slight expenditure to exceed revenues by 32,000. So a little bit of a difference to make up if we set the rate at 380. If you set it at 375,
Oh, gotcha.
now that's 375. Now we have a difference of 111,000 that need to be made up. And if you even reduced it even further to 365, we have $267,000 of expenses to cover. So that kind of gives you the range. At 385, the projected revenue from personal property tax will come close to making the county whole as far as the current expenditures. And as David and Jay mentioned, the expenses do include the original school fund number and some of these other options that David mentioned. You want to take a look at on the expense side, the COLA, the 501c3 contributions, some of the judicial requests. So those are the items that I think we want some feedback on today. And then what we would like to do is, once we have that, I'll factor it in and come up with a budget that looks balanced, and you can vote to advertise it next week. Did I mention anything, Spencer?
I don't think so. I will note down you do have at the bottom of each one of those sheets, you've got the changes there.
Right.
And two of the expenses changes. One of them is the 911 budget went up, and that was based on, like I say, Lexington's a little bit behind us in the budget schedule, and they're the fiscal agent for the 911 center, and that was a recommendation that came back. I'm comfortable with it. I think our dispatchers do a fantastic job, and we're lucky to be able to retain them, and that's the cost. Generally, that's the cost of a salary increase for them. And the railroad budget we received, the county's share, again, the city's fiscal agent for them as well. The county's projected share actually went down by a couple $1,000s. So those are just a couple revenue changes.
The only other thing that I would add is, as we're looking at the vehicle tax rate, we're also going to have to end up backing into the personal property tax relief and what percentage that is. For all the scenarios in the packet tonight, we're looking at 37%. As you know, the state allows us, it's just below $2.5 million to provide relief up to $20,000 on vehicles.
It's relief on the first 20,000 in valuation.
Yeah. And there may be some opportunity for us to lower that relief a little bit, say to 36% or 35.5%, to try to get that number as close to 2.5 million as we can. You have to give that amount. So we got to make sure we hit that amount in relief, but anything above that amount in essence comes out of county funds. So we've got to try to be as close to that number as
Or
we
else we're
possibly.
just leaving it on the table, is what you mean.
You know, we would be paying it out of our coffers.
Right,
Anything above.
right.
So it would be, that's a
Which if
number.
you don't give enough relief, then you're not even getting the 2.5 from the state.
Exactly.
So
We've
you're
got-
leaving that on the table.
We've got to get to the 2 and I'm using round numbers here. It's 2,460,000 or something, but I'm just using round number two and a
It's
half.
449.
So we've got to get to that number. But anything above that number, then in essence, we're collecting a tax to then pay it back out. I mean, just doesn't make sense, you know? So that's something that we'll continue to work on as well. That could, and I believe in the past year, that number has, in past years, that number has fluctuated anywhere from 2,550,000, which is really good, within, $50,000 to 2.8, which is basically 300,000 above, the money we get from state. So we just got to, and you're trying to project that number now for August, so it's not an exact science, but we can, I think we can hone in on that number a little bit to help us. And that could make a slight difference in the numbers that you're seeing here. It's not going to make a major difference, but it could be a slight difference.
One addition that I've got on splitting the tax rate, just make sure everybody is really clear, all other taxes other than those vehicle taxes, in what we're proposing here would remain at the current rate of 450, because those are somewhat depreciating. That's a depreciating value. So that number goes down a little bit, whereas all these numbers are going way up. So the state allowed, as of the law signed March 23rd, 22nd, allows us to split that out. I do want to point out as well too, that this law is only in effect for 3 years. So the way it's written right now, and if there were no other changes, it would expire January 1st, 2025. So the state's looking at this in a, I would assume, a wait and see type of thing, and see if it, see how the market responds. But yeah, it's automobiles, passenger trucks, vehicles, or equipment designed for use by the handicapped, motorcycles, mopeds, all-terrain vehicles, which we don't tax, and off-road motorcycles, campers, which is the one that kind of threw us the curve on Friday, that campers were included in this, which is why Commissioner Weitzel and Brooke Tomlin in his office scrambled to get some numbers there, because there was about $7 million in valuation that we had placed in the wrong category. And so what, as I think John touched on, what we're asking for now is the board to think about and discuss preferences for closing the budget gap, whether it's through revenue reduction, revenue adjustment, such as would occur with a change in the PPT rate, or a combination of the two. And just to give you all scheduling from staff's perspective and timing, in order to get you something on the board docs, the board's agenda posted at 5 o'clock on Thursday. We're going to try to have a finance committee meeting. I would very much prefer Wednesday, so we've got time to put that into writing, put it into the budget, and get it in so that you all would be prepared to discuss it more, and hopefully set a budget to advertise next Monday night. The other thing I would say too, that I would love to leave this meeting with a nod and say, okay, looking ahead towards trying to get folks to 90%, and that's total with the and the 5% COLA, and total cost of that, including the 5% local cost of constitutionals, is $452,000. And that number is currently set out as a consolidated number in the budget. That's just $452,000. In order to get a budget to publish, we need to then take that money and roll it into each individual budget. Every departmental line that needs to, and there's a fair amount of work that goes into that. So if we could be working on that, we could have you something ready for Monday night to be able to. And one more thing, on Monday night, I think you are all aware, when we have to advertise for 2 weeks, and it's posted in the News Gazette, where our deadline is essentially 10 to noon on Tuesday. So when the decision's made Monday night, we've got to have an ad ready and have it to the News Gazette by early the next morning, or by mid-morning.
So the other piece to that is if we're going to have a finance committee meeting on Wednesday, after tonight's meeting, if you change your mind or something new comes up, or you have a different thought or whatever, you really need to let either Mr. Suter, myself, or Mr. Lewis know by tomorrow evening, so that we've got that information when we go into finance committee on Wednesday, whatever time that will be. So I guess the first thing to consider, and we're not taking a vote or anything, but it's just kind of everybody speak your mind or thought or a nod or something. How does everybody feel about trying to get our employees to 90% and a 5% COLA? That would be the first thing to discuss.
I'm very much supportive of that. I don't feel like I need to go into any details, but I think as Mr. Lewis pointed out, I think it would be wrong for us to consider it for our employees and not support the school's 5% for their employees as well.
Any other comments on it?
I'm in favor for base level.
Yeah, this piece of the puzzle is just the county employees.
Well, we also, I think John can speak to this as well, but John, I think what we would do on the comp board is go ahead and plug those numbers and then plug in the associated revenue that we think would come from the state. And is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. So, yeah. Because we do have, that number includes that roughly $120,000 for the comp board employees that are locally supported, the difference
right.
we would not get from the state.
But we also have some employees that we fund fully.
Yes, correct. Yep, that's this as well.
The next sort of pieces to the puzzle would be, do you decide on your revenue and then what you can spend it on, or do you decide on your expenses and then figure out what revenue you need to meet that? Is there any thoughts about the external organizations, the nonprofits and their request? I believe we mentioned earlier, it's around, if you look at all their increases, total is approximately $20,000, I believe. And that would basically be, in the FY21 budget, I believe we cut
10%.
10%. And this would be roughly that 10% back to.
So we're only doing up to that 2020 budget. We're not, someone randomly said they wanted twice what they got. It's just back to 2020 funding, correct?
There was one agency that had an increase above the.
Yeah.
John probably can recall that. Put you on the spot, John. Yeah, there was one that actually requested that didn't request as much money as last year. And we had a few, by and large, most of them were were the 10% increase. If the board was thinking in that direction to bring them back to the 2019, 2020 level, 2019, 2020 levels, then you could say, well, we would fund up to the 10% to get them back to that level, but no additional beyond that. If they ask for 16% per se.
I don't recall who was the outlier, but
Unless it was the
So
YMCA.
I'm just, well, I don't know who it was. I mean, and I don't know that there were, but I think there were several actually. But I don't remember, but that's the problem. And I understand why we don't have our big binders, but it's hard to have completely this conversation when we're not looking at those numbers. But if you're asking the question, yes, I think that for me, supporting outside agencies up until what we did in 2020, I think is reasonable. But if you're trying to close the budget, that is definitely one place to look is, are you holding level funding? Or is there a really good reason that you're not? Can we talk about judicial increases? What is,
Yes.
oh, I'm sorry. I jumped
That's,
ahead. Bob, your feeling on external agencies.
You want to fund it, fully funded to 2020.
Basically want to give everybody their 10% back. That everybody was taking 10%.
Do you know what that would cost?
I think it was roughly around $20,000. Yeah. Give or take.
The judicial piece of it was the judges had asked for some, I guess, supplemental help for some of their employees, roughly 3,000 for each full-time and 1,500 for part-time. That equates to an increase of $25,500. I know we asked at one of our finance committee meetings and it wasn't determined. Do you have any idea of what either the cities are doing? Because I'm sure they got the same type of request.
The cities, I don't. Now there's it's a little different scenario with the shared courts with Rockbridge, Lexington. Lexington would need to share on whatever cost at a rate of 25% because we have shared cost and we pay 75% and the city pays 25%. These are requests that have come from Judge Cleveland, William Cleveland, Bill Cleveland. And I think this is the 4th year I think they've come forward with this request. And again, in your budget binder, there's a justification sheet that they brought forward of other localities that provide the funding. Botetourt, Buena Vista, Botetourt and Buena Vista are the closest. Highland County has just some of them that come to mind that provide a supplement for those clerks in those offices. And they're at varying levels. They are provided as a stipend, if you will, with a 1099. They're not just added to their salaries, so it doesn't tag on to the like VRS rate and that type of thing, or not rate, but VRS accumulation. Some of them are quarterly; they get paid. Some of them are once a year.
That's not a bonus.
It's not a bonus. It's an annual supplement. Yes. It could be viewed, I guess, as an annual bonus, but it's an annual supplement that they get that is intended to make them more competitive in the marketplace because the state doesn't fund what the market drives sometimes.
you know, that's the request, and it has been out there for a couple of years, and previously the board has decided not to fund that request, and certainly that's an option again this year. Or you could fund part of the request. You know, the request came to us in this particular amount. You could, if you deemed it necessary, wanted to do something, you could say, well, maybe we'll only do $1,000 for every full-time and $500 for part-time.
If we could just, I think, are you looking up that information right now for?
I am.
Okay.
So is the information the comparables that you're looking for?
Well, just a little more detail on the judicial increases.
Okay, well, so it's eight full-time, one part-time spread across two departments or two courts. One of them is general district court. And I believe there's 5 full-time, general district, 1 part-time. And then the balance of that, which would be 3 full-time, are in juvenile and domestic relations.
Yep.
That, I'm off, John?
That's correct.
Yeah, you got it.
Wasn't bad, that's my memory.
The total impact to us again was 20.
25,500.
So that's
Yep.
not a whole lot there for probably poorly paid.
Well, and I was just looking at some of the local ones, Roanoke City, that's what theirs is, 3,000 per. Same thing with Roanoke County. Highland County's 2,250 per employee. Buena Vista is 3,800 for the office between 2 employees.
Mhm. Okay.
Botetourt's 3,000 per employee, 15 per part-time. So I think they were trying to match Botetourt. And I didn't do this research. This was brought to Mr. or Judge Cleveland did this, but so I don't know. I haven't polled Augusta or Harrisonburg or anything, so I can't speak to whether or not they offer it.
I'm fine.
Keeping it as is. Keeping it as is. Mr. Lewis, you got any thoughts on that?
I won't help Judge Cleveland, but I'm just so tired of these unfunded mandates. I can't sort of wrap my head around it. Is what it amounts to. You know, it's just yet another General Assembly not paying what they say they're going to pay. So I'm, we've still got one more meeting. I want to help him. I think we can do something. I'm just not exactly sure where that end up. As you see, some of these scenarios are, $10,000 or $15,000 of net. So it may be that, there's some wiggle room in there, but I think it sounds like the general assessment of the board is to try to help. So.
And the other expenditure that we need to discuss is the contribution to the schools. As was mentioned earlier, the original request going back to December, January, whenever the first run of the budget was, which was really unknown because it was off of the former governor's budget, but it was 244,000. That's the number that we've kept in the budget up to this point, simply because, as Mr. Lewis has stated, there's continues to be unknowns. At the last request that came through, or at the last meeting that we had with the school board, the request was 567,379. The finance committee did not make that change at the time because we were still waiting to see what happened with their insurance. Their insurance, which they have no control, they've gone to market to try to shop for a better carrier, but their current insurance agent is coming back with a 20% basically increase in cost, which is outrageous. Typically, that's in the 8 to 12% range. And then I believe they had a 1% bonus in there for their employees, which, going back to the insurance for just a second, one of the reasons we kept it at 244 was if that insurance dropped from 20% to 11% increase, that would be roughly $240,000. And that 11% is what historically we've seen on for their insurance. The bonus, I believe 1% was around 240,000 that they were asking for. And then the other piece of the puzzle that I'm not sure they figured out yet either was, I believe the state has said for their percentage of SOQ positions, they're looking at an 8% increase over the biennium, with 4 of that being this coming budget and 4 of it being the following budget. What
But you can do 5 and 3.
you can, but if you do 5 this year, the state's only coming through with 4, so the locality's got to pick up the difference this year.
Right, but then next year, my understanding is that it could be transferred to next year. If you only went up 3, then you would still get the credit for the total 8.
Have you heard any more about that?
I have not.
I think, we're coming down to the wire here as we keep talking about next week. And, something else to consider that I think about with this is, the anything left at the end of a fiscal year for the school system goes towards the capital improvements fund that we have, the agreement, or that both boards have, which is the agreement to have any little bit extra put in there for the capital improvement projects that are to be needed. And we know we have some. So if there ends up being some insurance savings from that, then that's where that money will go. And we need to be putting money into that account. I've often thought of we should be putting some money there possibly at some point.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, the reserves comes from last year's budget. I mean, are you saying that we should budget a 20% increase and then if it's really only a 11% increase, take 9% of that money and put it in our capital?
Well, that's where it would go. I'm just saying by default, that's where it
Well,
goes.
usually we wait until we know what that number is before we budget it, though, correct?
Which we're not going to have the opportunity to do.
You don't think we'll know by then?
At the end of this, what I was going to say is it's time to go back one more time to the schools and say, we got to make a decision. Is there anything else you can offer us, information wise to help guide us for that?
Can I know too, we don't have our number firm yet for insurance here. I mean, we budgeted a 10% increase. They were comfortable with our consultant was comfortable with like a 9.5 or something. We just rounded to 10, but we're not going to have that number till adoption anyway.
And the other conversation to have, or the other piece of that conversation to have with the schools is, as I'm sure they've been scouring their budget as well, has anything changed since that was
Right.
530? So 560 was almost a month ago. Maybe, I think we just need to, I would feel better. It's just like we sent the book out to NADA, it's just time for a check-in there. But
Well,
that was the request. And
last year, here's my only issue with doing it this way. If you remember last year, we kept that high number for insurance in the budget, right? Do you remember? And then we said, look, if your budget number comes down, then you'll be able to give your teachers the raise that they deserve or whatever. And that number did. But we still got letters because we kept the number of what we were budgeting for the school salaries at a certain level. And we got email after email after email from, at least I did, from teachers saying, please fund us the full amount. And we in effect did, but they didn't feel like we did. And we took, I mean, I felt like we really got raked over the coals for not telling them ahead of time, okay, here's the, you know, we budgeted low for their salary increases, but high for their insurance in hopes that that number would come down. So then that could be moved and gave them the ability to do that. But we never got credit for it.
Did they do
Yeah, they ended up doing it, but not before I had gotten 10 emails from teachers saying, why haven't, you
Yeah,
know,
I don't believe I supported that scenario last year either.
well, what I'm saying
but,
is I don't want to set us up for that again.
I,
And
that's my, yeah, I mean, that's something I think that the request is what it was. If we're going to support them, then that's what we should have in there. But I do want, but if they found $10,000 somewhere, you know, in the past month, that's useful information to get. So like Mr. Cleveland, I'm not, the Judge Cleveland, I'm not, it's not quite time to have to make that decision yet. We still got a few days, but I'd like to check back with them. I hadn't
okay,
heard from them.
is there any way we can have a short meeting, a phone meeting or something?
No, I mean, the Spencer, the staff, you know,
Okay.
can ask, or
The executive
finance
com-
committee,
right.
you know, yeah.
Because we keep missing that meeting or keep not having that with the idea that we don't have enough information to share with the executive committee or, so just wondered where we were with that.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating part about it. Ms. Ayers, yeah, that, you know, and we still don't have the information, you know, but we're to the point where we're required to make a decision, even though the state isn't. And we don't have that either, but that's my thoughts.
But I guess perhaps we can fund the 11% health insurance at 11%. And then if it's truly 20, then perhaps that can come out of the reserves.
We need to find out if how the state's giving them 4% this year and 4% next year. If they give a 5% this year, does that count towards 1% next year? I don't think we can, I mean, we can't assume what's going to happen next year or the year after that or anything. You know, will they be able to give another 3% next year? Hopefully. Well, we can't assume that. You know, so will that extra percent that they gave this year count next year and be funded? That's my only concern. You know, if a state's giving them 4, but they're going to give a 5, you know, we would have to fund that this year. And if it doesn't count next year and there's not enough monies for them to give the additional 3, you know, they may not get it next year either. So we would be stuck funding it from here on out.
I thought with the biennium budget, it was 8% over the 2 years.
Over the 2 years.
Yes, but the state has certain regulations about if you don't give it, you don't get it. So just because, and you know, if they're allowing them 4% this year, and I think it's great that they're trying to give their staff 5%. I think that's great. My concern is what happens to that 1% the following year.
Do you get credit for it?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And I also think it's good. I mean, you know, teachers obviously have been impacted by the pandemic. It's just like everybody else, and you know, kids have been impacted. You know, the whole process. You know, because you had kids out for 18 months and then coming back in, and it was adjustment periods. This whole school year has been hard on everybody. parents, teachers, kids, everybody that's involved. I think the bonus is a good thing and probably warrants it. I'm not sure. My only question is, I'm not sure that we should be budgeting that bonus as opposed to it's a one-time deal. Let it be a one-time deal that comes out at the end of your savings rather than going into escrow to pay for it. But that's just one board member's thoughts. You know, the board as a whole needs to decide on it.
Okay, I can certainly ask that question, and essentially what I've got written down is what is the mechanism for the raises over the biennium? And checking to see if the schools are proposing an additional amount above and beyond what they think the state's going to give, and if so, and if that is given this year, will that additional amount local funding be credited next year by the state? Is that my
And have they found any other savings
Yeah.
in having in their budget? And, you know, they presented us, again, back to the salaries in comparison. You know, we got that sheet again this year. So, you know, the whole, to me, the whole conversation is not just what is the state doing with the budget. It is what are salaries that are going to keep our employees and not have them go to Augusta or Botetourt or Bath or Amherst or anywhere else. You know, that's always part of the discussion to me every time.
Or just retire early. Retire at 50, because there's that incentive out there. We still have an incentive to retire early. Rockbridge County.
Well, it's a shame that we're having this conversation about the schools from a respect that, and I know this goes back 6-7 years. You know, supervisors have always asked for a number earlier and earlier and earlier in the process. Schools gave us a number, we kept that number in the budget rather than making a change when they made a change. But the other piece of that is that, you know, with the state only funding SOQ positions, which amounts to about 50% of the school staff. And then of that 50%, they only fund 45% of the increase. You know, the so-called state share, which is the composite index. So the locality then is, you know, when you multiply them percentages out, it's really about probably 30% state, 70% local to fund those increases. Which,
Well,
but you're going to have state elected officials going around touting how they gave all the teachers, you know, 4% raise or whatnot, which is not
Thank you, David.
accurate.
no,
You saved me from saying it this year.
it isn't accurate. But nor is the perception. I mean, we shouldn't expect the state to fund our schools 100%. I mean, it is a formula. It is a percentage. Correct. I mean, that's not what you expect to.
But it should be funded more so from the state side than the locality side. It is what I was getting at. Even if 50-50 would be better than what it is right now.
I think his point, yeah, but and his Mr. McDaniel's main point was that's the positions that they say you should have aren't even fully funded. So that's the real gap. You know, if we as a locality want some local control and determine that we need, you know, 2 extra aides, then that's our choice. I get some of that, but at least you know, contribute what the laws say you're supposed to be contributing. Not, and it's the same with the comp boards, you know. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great point with the comp boards. You know, when they turn around and tell us that our treasurer's office need 3.78 people, but at the same time, they fund one position 90% and then 2 positions at 50%. And then we're stuck funding, you know, the 10%, 50, and then a part-time person and another full-time to get the work done, you know. So I would advise all supervisors to have those type of conversations with your elected officials at the state level. So what about the school request? I mean, obviously, we're going to try to get some more information, figure out what it is. Do you want to, I mean, I guess your options are whatever we determine that new amount to be. Do you want to increase our budget to that amount to cover it? Do you want to keep our budget where it's at? And ultimately, they would just have to figure out what they can do in their budget to make up whatever difference, or what do you want to do there?
My feeling was we have one more gasp at that, armed with what any additional information we can get from the school. So
I mean, I think when you ask the question to me about my preference of how to deal with what number to put in for the schools, my answer was just keep what we budgeted ahead of time, because that number that they have given us really doesn't mean it. I mean, they've done the best they can, but they just don't have it's not a real number as far as I'm concerned until we have those very important bits. That insurance, it's a huge thing. So but that doesn't mean I object to funding it at 500 and some percentage if those numbers are true, if that makes sense.
well, I don't know why they're not. They're true. They're true updated numbers.
The insurance number is not
I see what you mean.
it is not a real number.
We
and that's
suspect that it's not.
It's an
but
impactful number. And so
absolutely.
So I guess, is there any way that I mean, how can we budget that number to like a 12%? And what do we do if it's truly 20? I mean, because there is a history that it's like you all
Yes,
know. I
and
mean,
that's why we.
this is how it's always. It's at 20, but then it's really at 11. So instead of going ahead, can we fund it or can we budget it at 12%? Come up with a budget for that, and then what if we do? What happens if it's really at 20? And then can they come back to us for the money after that, or then we can use it out of the.
You could make an appropriation for the difference if necessary. But I think what I'm hearing is, and Mr. Day, please chime in with your thoughts before I make a statement there. Well, what I have kind of heard is Mr. Suter needs to find out some information for us. The finance committee can then discuss it, and you're okay as long as those numbers, once we get some hard numbers, you would be okay funding that amount.
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right. So we'll work on that. All right. The personal property tax. Now, ultimately, this is, to get to a balanced budget, you got to know what your expenditures are so you can know what your revenues need to be, or vice versa, know what your revenues are and then you budget to expenditures. As you can see, there's a couple options that have been presented. Again, the finance committee, I think, needs to take a hard look at the PPTR and what that percentage would be and move forward. As you can see, though, the $3.87.5 would be slight surplus. The $3.80 would be slight loss. $3.75 grows a little bit more.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Go ahead.
I hate to say, but the schools is at the 244. So these numbers are based on that. But I don't think there's anything for the, finalized for the judicial. I guess the judicial would be the last thing that's sort of undecided, right? Which could make that number flip one or another. All right, thank you.
Well, we just increased $20,000 for outside agencies, right?
That's already in the budget. The 20,000 is already in the budget expenditures.
Right. But
And
then
then
the 25.
The 25 is already in the budget expenditures. So if you didn't want to do that, our expenditures would come down.
Okay.
Correct.
Oh, we're adding them to it, okay.
These are expenses that are already in the budget that we have some control over. There's a lot of expenses in our budget we don't have much control over. So that's why we wanted to get your opinion on it. And
So with that, I mean, it seems prudent to me that we go with the 3.875, but that's, well, I mean, we can, but we haven't addressed the last thing, the transfer from our reserves.
Mhm.
Okay, so that gives us, can we have some ideas about what one-time expenses could be transferred and what amount can be?
well, we've already got most all of, when we went through the
Already got
budget, we've already done that for one-time expenditures. What that is let's say the board decided you want to go with $3.75 on your personal property. Based off the numbers that we have, which could change, but based off the numbers that we have, that would be a deficit of $111,659. So to get to a balanced budget, we would have to transfer that amount from reserves to our budget to be at zero.
Okay. What percentage of reserves do we have currently? 30.
Yes, our last,
Kristen's pulling it up now. It's
our
the
minimum-
high
I
30s.
don't know.
John, were you trying to tell us something?
No, I was going to say, I don't know what your percentage reserves are off the top of my head.
I think it's high 30s, low 40s at this point.
yeah, and our requirement's 20, correct?
Right, and honestly, you can't keep having reserves we can't keep growing a
Well-
reserve at that. I mean, am I wrong?
Keeping in mind that one of the reasons it jumped up so much is because of the ARPA funds and the CARES Act and that type of thing.
So,
And that money has a limited time span that needs to be spent. So it will come back down, but there is room there if you needed to transfer 100,000,
It-
200,000.
That sort of goes against the rule of thumb of using those for one-time expenses. This isn't what's in this budget isn't necessarily one time.
yeah, no, I agree.
To
with
my
you.
way of thinking.
I agree with you. I would rather see it in, like, I would rather see us, have we already used the, what's it called, our slush fund for our no? Jay, you're.
I'm sorry,
making a
no,
face.
I'm not
Making
sure
a
that we
face.
want to use the term, that term, I'm sorry, but what were you saying? I apologize.
Um,
What was your, I'm sorry.
My point was, have we exhausted all categories of spending that can be considered first-time expenses?
One time, yes, ma'am. I feel so. Mr. McDaniel's point was possibly the schools bonus, which wouldn't necessarily be ours. I get was his thought, but to me, that's preemptively depleting the capital improvements fund that we know we're going to need, and we know we're going to need money in.
Okay. So are you saying that you prefer to go for the 3.875? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure that one work, I want to provide help. I just don't know, this stuff in the personal property of the vehicles, as Mr. White said, it's never decreased, but we don't know that we'll have what rate of increase, that could be. The grocery tax, even if they don't change it within 3 years, the potential of that goes away in 3 years.
But the only thing with that is
So-
you can't budget 3 years from now. You're budgeting for next year. That's my only thing. I mean, who knows what might happen 2 years from now or 3 years from now? We can't account for that in this upcoming budget.
I guess so. My thought there is to as we adjust the rate, the personal property rate, I don't want to get in. I was trying to avoid scenarios where we have to adjust that all the time. You know, in other words, to smooth that, it's hard for citizens to not know what to expect, not to what to budget for their responsibilities. If there's
Well, I'm, as a
large
member of
swings.
the finance, as you're the member of the finance committee, I'm just trying to, my initial reaction or feeling about this is that we're conservative and we budgeted 3.87. But as you said, we wanted to give our citizens the biggest break, and I'm trying to find a way to do that.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is you don't want to do that. So I'm just trying to,
Yeah, no,
I'm trying to give me some,
I can't. I'm struggling with exactly where to end up. So I'm not being evasive or anything. I'm not sure myself. And you know, again, we have a little more time to make that decision. So
it sounds like we only have 24 hours before we need to move on this budget. I mean, we could advertise the 3.875 and drop it, but we can't advertise a lower rate and come up. So perhaps that's what we should do, is advertise the 3.875 and then look to hopefully moving it down to, you know, whatever we can do.
I guess last way I would say it is, we would be coming back with a better, a final recommendation. These were some scenarios to discuss. These show almost where we are, but not quite. So I'm just not ready to feel comfortable recommending that quite yet. But it's not going to take us long to get to what that is the next time we convene, because we have all this history, we've done all this work.
Okay.
Is where I'm at.
Mr. Day, do you have any thoughts on the rate?
This time, I think I'm comfortable with the 3.875. Unless the information from the schools or something changes drastically.
I understand what Mr. Lewis is getting at. You know, if you yo-yo the personal property tax rate year after year after year, 1 year you go down, 1 year you go up, but it's confusing and disruptive, and I get that. At the same time, from my personal point of view, is try to get it as low as possible this year to give our citizens as much of a break as possible. It may very well be that we're sitting here next year and trying to decide, do we go to $4 or $4.10? I don't know what next year brings. I just know what I'm looking at with this current year, and trying to give as much of a break to our citizens and put money back in their pocket as we possibly can. From my point of view, you know, trying to keep expenditures as close as possible. And even if we were running a slight deficit, and I know it's not a long-term solution, but to look at a transfer of some amount from reserves. I'm not talking about 300, 400, 500,000, you know, 100,000, 150,000, something like that, to balance our budget would be money well spent this year to help our citizens.
If there was a time to do something like that, this is it. I couldn't disagree with that.
So your answer your question is, as of the last audited number is of unassigned fund balance is 37.51%.
37?
It's actually 37.51. It's actually higher than that because there's some committed funds that that you haven't assigned to a purpose like that.
And
51.
And how are we on track to be on budget this current year? How are we?
Oh.
Our current year.
We got some areas where we are and some we aren't. Usually it's kind of an accordion. We try to balance it by the End of the year, obviously, we couldn't figure out, or we couldn't anticipate, $4 fuel, $4 and $5
Right.
fuel.
I'm just trying to see whether or not we're again this year going to have a surplus.
But while $4 fuel is an expenditure that we had not accounted for and is causing us some pain, we also didn't necessarily anticipate a 13% increase in personal property. So there's some relief there on the revenue side to account for that. So it's a mixed bag that we should be on par with a balanced budget or have a little bit of surplus. And we've run a surplus for a number of years as a county, which
We should be
is
very
good.
proud
Yeah,
of
you
the-
don't want to run a
I'm not.
deficit. But
You don't want to run a deficit.
Mr.
But-
Daniel, I'm sorry, I've got to go. I didn't know the meeting would take that long, but I have some family commitments at 7 o'clock.
Thank you, Mr.
TJ.
I think, serious, we'll have maybe by Monday. I'm still getting used to the process of, but I'll see those reports this week and we have that revenue report.
Yeah, we'll see where we're tracking.
That's where we're tracking on that.
Yep.
For your regular meeting.
And so far in
I
our,
think revenues were doing very well, so.
yeah, so far in our, if you go back to any of our board docs with the financial presentation, you can see the line chart and revenues have been above expenditure.
Right.
So
No, but as a philosophical, our policy is to keep 20%, but at some point you don't keep growing because then the citizens get a very valid question is perhaps I'm being taxed too much. If you're
We're not a
So-
bank.
right.
Well, the other thing too is one thing that we don't do that I'm really recommending, and Ash and I will have some discussions about this, is you don't see a line typically in our budget on set aside for capital in the future. We've been relying on end of year savings and sliding that into a capital fund. A good policy is to go ahead and assign some of your tax base every year to set money back because cash is king, especially with the changing. Ashton mentioned this earlier. We're looking at interest rate, boost here over the next year and probably beyond. And the more cash you have on hand, the less you have to borrow. So, you can take some of that savings, and we did it in the past too. We took a chunk of money of the county surplus and we applied it to our capital plan so that you've got money sitting down so that you're not having to borrow more.
Mhm.
And we've got a lot of projects coming up. One thing I did want to note, I failed to mention it. In order to do a split rate, separate rates for the two categories of classes, it does require a public hearing for an ordinance. So that would need to be done concurrently with setting a public hearing concurrently with the budget public hearing. It would be two separate public hearings, but we'd need to set them on the same dates.
So do you need anything else from us in terms of?
I think the direction that I've heard is get information from the schools. The finance committee will meet on Wednesday. Certainly, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything between now and then, please pass them on to a member. We'll try to do our best to meet those requests. But we're also trying to get the lowest personal property tax rate that we can to try to get to either a balanced budget or a slight deficit, which would result in a transfer of reserves. Is that okay? And so as soon as we have that, we will pass along. I don't know if it'll be Wednesday, but certainly by Thursday, because I'm assuming it have to be part of board docs. So. All right. Does anybody else have anything?
We got one more quick item, and that is adoption of a revised budget schedule. It's included in front of you here. So again, requesting public hearing on the April 11th. Advertisement 1 would be in April 13th. Advertisement 2 would be in the April 20 paper. And then budget public hearing, and I've got that for Tuesday, April 26th. And then budget adoption for 1 week. There needs to be a week between the public hearing and adoption. And so that would be Tuesday, May the 2nd. And
Is it May the 2nd or May 3rd?
oh, 3rd, sorry. Yep. And, we have had a budget public hearing, I think, in the past and concurrently with a regular board meeting, but it's, that's very tight. I think we got a fair amount of stuff coming up on April 26th, and that would be a whole lot to pack into one meeting, which is why one of the reasons I asked to put it on the 26th. So it's focused on budget.
So,
6 p.m.
April the 11th, April 26th,
And May 3rd.
and May 2nd. Or 2nd, you got it wrong. Okay. Or 3rd? You want Tuesday?
Yeah, Tuesday.
Okay.
Yep.
May the 3rd.
It has to be a week.
Is there a motion to approve the adopted schedule?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Ms. Ayers,
Yes.
Mr. Day,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes as well. Is there anything else you have to go over tonight, Mr. Sue?
Oh, sir.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? Second. Mr. Day,
Yes,
Ms. Ayers,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes as well.
okay, we offer something, you good?
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, John.